You've been told cholesterol is bad. We've all been told that it clogs your arteries and that lowering LDL is the only way to prevent a heart attack. And later, ApoB joined the list. And for many, ApoB has replaced LDL as the bad guy. That's all you got to do. That was the message, and still is the message for the vast majority of doctors. That story shaped everything. Public health guidelines, prescriptions, even what people thought they should eat. Eggs, red meat, butter, these things were off the table. Statins, they became the centerpiece of heart disease care. $1 billion industry. It was neat, simple, easy to explain. But what if I told you some people with sky-high LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol, have no more plaque than those with normal numbers? In today's video, I'll walk you through the latest research, plus new evidence straight from Dave Feldman himself. He's the engineer turned researcher leading this charge because a few years ago, Dave Feldman noticed something strange in his own body, his own lab work, his own metabolism, and it just did not fit the script. When he switched to a ketogenic diet, something surprising happened. His triglycerides dropped, his HDL went up, and all signs of metabolic health improved, except for one, his LDL. It skyrocketed. According to the old story, that meant danger, high risk, a ticking time bomb. But here's the strange part. Dave felt better, he was leaner, he was more energetic, his blood work showed improvements everywhere else. So how could his body be getting healthier even while his LDL went through the roof? That question sent him down a path that would change the cholesterol debate. And in our exclusive interview, he'll reveal data that could flip the cholesterol story upside down. By the way, if you're looking for a clear path to avoid a heart attack, check out my free 7-step heart attack prevention protocol. There's a link in the description below. Back in April 2025, Dave Feldman, along with his colleagues, Matt Budoff and Adrian Sotomoto, published a study. It was titled Plaque Begets Plaque, ApoB Does Not. It was also known as the Keto-CTA Trial. It was a bunch of folks that were on keto diets, and they were measuring plaque using CTA, CT angiogram. This was a groundbreaking study. It made waves across the scientific community and social media. Here's what they did. Participants with the sky-high LDL levels had 2 CT angiograms. They had a scan a year apart. Just for context, CT angiograms are the gold standard now when it comes to detecting plaque in the coronary arteries. But here are the major findings that just about everyone off guard. First, in people with sky-high LDLs, 1 in 1,000 and above, 250, 450, huge numbers. Plaque was not associated with LDL cholesterol, ApoB either. So the second thing was, and this is key, only those with the highest amount of plaque at baseline continued to make more plaque. This was shown by both Dr. Budoff's analysis and CLEERLY's analysis, the AI company performing the second read. Since the April 7th paper, a third analysis was performed by another AI company called HeartFlow, and a fourth analysis called QAngio, the pre-specified method for the study. So the message seemed clear. The more plaque you already have, the more you're likely to build. But it's not cholesterol driving the process. That alone was enough to shake up a lot of assumptions. Nobody expected what came next.
The rate of progression of non-calcified plaque for these individuals in the Keto-CTA study is incredibly concerning.
Even their best subjects with the lowest progression still increased their total plaque burden by over 30% in a year. And their worst increased by 150%.
If this pans out in general, it's a bit concerning. This is a 3.8-fold faster progression of soft plaque in the keto group compared to a population of Westerners that is reasonably healthy without a ton of risk factors and that doesn't have that sky-high cholesterol, that it's sky high LDL, and that it's not on statins.
That is among the most deceptive examples of misreporting of data I've ever seen.
So the backlash hit hard. Critics said the study didn't disprove the cholesterol theory at all. Now, why would they say that? Because, according to them, participants in the study trial were building plaque at a rate even higher than people with severe diabetes. So maybe it wasn't a win for the low-carb crowd after all. Or was it? After the study was published, Dave finally got access to the raw imaging data. And what he found made him pause. This was not over. So why did they publish the results in the first place using the CLEERLY data and not the other analyses? Well, part of the problem is that the anomalies in the CLEERLY data weren't fully known at that point of publication. Dave was properly blinded to the data until after it was published. That's the way it should have been. Dave actually alerted the CLEERLY team about the problems, and they agreed to a quality control pass. They said it should be done, and they would do it. But then the unexpected happened. Dave and his team were later told by the CEO that, no, CLEERLY would refuse the quality control check. Why? Was it about scientific confidence or protecting an IPO? They were going public. It's no secret that CLEERLY is looking to go public. Was it the influence of the broader medical community? Were they pushing this to sabotage the study? Because even the CLEERLY analysis showed that the so-called rapid plaque progression had no association with LDL or, as the standard medical community is converting to, ApoB. It just had no association. It's clearly trying to protect its market value, its customers, which are the cardiologists, internists, and family practitioners in the standard medical community. Was this an attempt by the medical establishment to preserve the LDL-centered status quo? Well, let me tell you, what you're about to hear in this interview might just put the cholesterol theory to rest for good. So, Dave, thank you again for jumping on with us today. Very excited, as I said, about talking specifically about what's going on today.
Yeah, we're at a very key moment. It's for anybody who's followed. It's been a journey. Obviously, Ford, I've appeared on your channel many times, including, I believe, even before the study began.
Oh, yeah.
We've been chatting for quite a while. And you're exactly right. The star of the show that is going to be in the forthcoming manuscript that we're going to be putting a lot of focus on is the regression, that we want to highlight those cases of regression. I will level set now that all 4 analyses are in for our study, including the pre-registered methodology, which is QAngio. Now that all 4 are in, as I predicted myself when we got our first initial data, and knowing that the average of our participants' age it's middle age, it's at around 55. As I predicted then, population-wide, we would see a net progression in plaque. But frankly, that's an easy prediction to make because that's likely the case. For most people, you can't necessarily count on plaque regression. But importantly, would we find that some people within our cohort, in spite of having very high levels of LDL and ApoB, did in fact have verifiable regression in plaque? And the answer to that question is yes. Now, I want to be a good scientist, and I want to emphasize that while we have a subset that showed regression, we also had a subset, even if very small, that showed rapid progression. But again, I would expect this in any population, any sizable population of, say, middle-aged folks. This is why it should always be emphasized, whether you're on a vegan diet, whether you're an athletic group of people, and so forth. A lot of times people don't know they might have more advanced heart disease. And that's another thing our study has done a great job at elucidating, is saying for those people who do have a high level of plaque at baseline, when they got their first scan, it was very predictive of whether or not they would have more plaque in their second scan. So that's kind of a high level view, I guess you could say, of the study as to where it stands right now. So this is what's changed since the April 7th paper. There was some interviews between, there was kind of a social media rollout. And what happened was that the 2 major findings that the 2 analyses we had on hand for the April 7th paper, of the semi-quantitative data set and of the CLEERLY data set. They agreed on these two major things that I just mentioned, that there is a prediction of plaque for baseline plaque. So that has an association. The more plaque you have at baseline, the more likely it is that you'll see plaque in the future, but it's an often, not an always. And that secondly, for those that did see a plaque progression, was there an association between LDL or, for that matter, ApoB? There was no association between those two. We have since had 2 additional analyses that have been reported and that I was able to give the preliminary data on, but is not yet published. That's what we're working on right now. The first of those is HeartFlow. That's also like CLEERLY in that it's an AI-guided reading quantitative analysis. And the other is the pre-registered methodology, which is METIS-Q Angio. And that's also a quantitative analysis. Now that all 4 of those analyses are completed, 3 of them broadly agree with each other. The semi-quantitative, the HeartFlow analysis, and the Q Angio analysis all generally agree with each other. The CLEERLY analysis, however, does not. The CLEERLY analysis, while it does agree with those 2 major findings, in fact, all 4 of those analyses do, the ones from the April 7th paper, there is a bit of a difference in the magnitude of plaque progression for the CLEERLY analysis relative to the other 3.
Let me ask another question. You've used the term semi-quantitative versus quantitative a couple of times. Why are you using those terms? And what does that mean?
So let's break both of those out. Semi-quantitative in an imaging study is usually the first data set to be completed. What it is that you've got a blinded expert cardiology readers, like say Dr. Budoff, who are using software to go in 3D through the coronary arteries at 15 to 17 predetermined checkpoints, if you will, through the arteries. They're going to those places where there's commonly a development of plaque, such as where there's a bifurcation or where there's some places of shear stress. And they look there and then they make a score. The score is a 0, which means there's no visible plaque that they can detect, all the way up to 3, which means that there's very severe levels of plaque. So that was 1. We only have 1 semi-quantitative, which is that. The other 3 are the quantitative. One of the more interesting things that I can say now is that I was fascinated by how much CLEERLY and HeartFlow were similar to each other in a matter of averages. As in the first and second scan, averages were similar in many of those participants. But the reason I emphasize averages is because in the case of HeartFlow, in some cases they're lower, in some cases they're higher, and CLEERLY they're all 100% higher. It's like a fixed ordering, if you will. And I myself wanted to see the 0 CAC folks. I wanted to see how much those people with the 0 CAC would have plaque regression versus progression. And my prediction is we'd see a number of people, at least at the low levels, that would be part of the noise of regression. And right there, sure enough, it matched what it was that we had in the paper of people who had a 0 CAC, only having soft plaque progression. That to me was that was tough. That was a tough thing to absorb. In the CLEERLY data set, they don't have CAC, but they have something called calcified plaque volume. In that data set, and I'm going a little bit off of memory, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. In that data set for the baseline scans of CLEERLY, there were 42 that had a 0 calcified plaque volume, as in no detectable calcified plaque volume for the baseline scan. So that's 40% roughly, right? In the second scan, in the follow-up scan for CLEERLY, a little less than half of them for the first time had detectable levels of calcification. In other words,
less than half of that 40%.
Exactly. In other words, we just happened to catch at the moment, the year that it happened, calcified plaque. We just happened to catch our cohort having 40% having no detectable calcified plaque in the year 1 of CLEERLY. Then having half of those, or almost half of them, have the first detectable calcified plaque in the follow-up scan. Again, to me, that seemed difficult to fully digest. I'm trying to find a good way of just saying very implausible, but I don't know another way of describing this. I would expect a conversion once you get to a large enough sample size to at least be more gradual if there already was 4.5 years average at these levels at baseline. I think that's the thing people miss. It'd be different if you had some intervention that started at the first scan. And then at the second scan, there's all these things that happened. You could say, wow, whatever that intervention is, I'd be concerned about it. But change that to, for 4.5 years, we had the same average of 250 LDL, for example. And it just happened to be in that moment we saw coming into the second scan all of these things that changed from the first scan. In engineering and software development, we would say, let's just do a quality control check.
Yeah.
Just check. Can you run that again just so that we can be sure?
And again, given what I used to do, it was 35, 40 years ago at Hopkins. Maybe they've changed, but I doubt it. It raises my antennae as well, what actually happened. And I'll just go ahead and say this. To me, it looks like somebody maybe dropped the sequence on some of the actual scans and then put them back in the order they assumed they would go in. I have to tell you that. I mean, that's just what it looks like from where I stand way outside, and I don't know enough about it. Maybe that's wrong.
My larger answer is I don't know what happened with the CLEERLY analysis, but we've been doing our best for literally months to, particularly in reporting to them, the accumulating data that I've just now told you about, because HeartFlow does show the wobble at the bottom. Q-angio does the same thing. The accumulation on the things that I've just now described with, like, say, calcification, it's much more in line with everything you see outside of our study. So we're not even just talking about comparisons internally between these data sets that agree with each other and not with CLEERLY. But CLEERLY is anomalous in many ways. This data set that was provided to us, it's anomalous in many ways that you don't see outside of our study with other studies as well.
I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. Did you say that what you saw in terms of plaque development really had nothing to do with either LDL or ApoB?
Not only that, but unlike many other studies, we have 4 analyses. I'll state that again, importantly. And of those 4, 3 of them are by entirely different teams, entirely different entities, entirely different methodologies, for which in all 3, there is no association between LDL and ApoB, not even close. To reemphasize, it isn't just that we didn't see it across the whole cohort. Adrian did different sectionals of those people who did have, say, for example, a positive CAC, looking just at those people, see if there was an association there. There wasn't. He looked just at those people with the high LDL only. Was there an association there? There wasn't. He looked at the rapid progressors. I just mentioned there's a small subset that are rapid progressors. Did they have an association between LDL and ApoB and plaque progression? There wasn't. There just isn't in anywhere from within our cohort in any way that he was able to subset it.
So people are people, and people reacted the way we might have predicted. So the low-carb community's all been about, you know what, ignore your doctor. Don't take a statin. Don't worry about your LDL. Worry about your metabolic health. And the low-carb community took the results of this study and ran with it. And to your credit and Nick's and Adrian's, it was like, well, guys, we're not saying LDL doesn't matter. We're just reporting the facts. It was sort of hard to get that message out of what the low-carb community presented. But you know what? Again, I think you did a good job of that. So I think the low-carb community and their reaction to it helped fan the flames with other folks, especially on YouTube and places where social media. And in fact, I think, Dave, you and Nick and Adrian got beat up pretty bad. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, it's entirely anticipated. Every time we have results that we're reporting from the study, we anticipate that there's going to be pushback. There's a lot of folks who have even said that we shouldn't do the study at all, that it's unethical to study folks with high LDL because it's already just a known fact that they're going to be higher risk population-wide. So, of course, we knew that we would be undergoing lots of scrutiny. The place where I definitely feel that we could have done better was on the social media rollout. And we weren't quite as coordinated as we could have been.
So it's a really good point. So I remember the day and what happened with the social media rollout. I remember getting a text from Jesus or a WhatsApp. He said, Adrian had done something on social media. And then he said, and guess what happened with Gil Carvalho and Matt Butoff? So things looked a little bit dicey. And my reaction was, yeah, but the thing is, they've got, 100 people with LDLs way beyond 1 in 1,000 now. And they're not forming plaque. I think there's a lot of focus here on minor items. But that focus grew and grew and grew. And it grew into, hey, guys, you've got a lot of plaque growth in this group that you're underreporting. Was that really what this looks like when you look at the study, the way you planned it, the way it came out?
Well, just set aside all the technical for a moment. Let's say that you want to check on something, anything, and you have a means of measuring it. And you measure it, and you note what the measurement was. And then you go back and you say, well, I just want to double check, so I'm going to do one more measurement with this different device. And then you do that. And there's ways in which both measurements agree, but then there's a way in which they don't agree. What's the next course of action? You don't even need to be a scientist. You go,
Look again?
yeah, I need more than two of these measurements. I need another measurement, maybe with another device, maybe with another. And that's, you get a third opinion, right? But that's hopefully not just an opinion. It's another means of quantification. At the point at which I knew both of these initial analyses were in disagreement with each other, I'm thankful for the fact that behind the scenes, I said, I don't want a third and then we stop at the third. I want to schedule. I want us to have a total of 4. So we get at least 2 more that are coming. Right?
Yeah, that would have sort of left you at 2 versus 1. And one of the 2 is not the same kind of analysis. Right. Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to see if we could get that. But the irony is, I only was sure that I wanted to get that additional analysis after it became clear, no pun intended, that CLEERLY wasn't going to do the quality control pass that I spoke about in my presentation. So what happened, just to back up a step, is once I realized there were some issues with the CLEERLY data, which I only could have known once the raw data was made available to us as the Citizen Science Foundation, because at the completion of the April 7th paper, the Citizen Science Foundation would take possession of the anonymized data set from the research center, because that's how it works, is we're appropriately blinded from those data, from the raw data. I myself can't review it as the funder until that paper is completed, until the CLEERLY data has been reported. Once it was reported, then I could actually do more granular analysis myself as the head of the Citizen Science Foundation. And that started the moment I got it on the 18th of April. I then found a number of issues that, frankly, I wanted to bring to the attention of Lundquist and CLEERLY right away. And about 6 days later, we were chatting with their CMO, who is also a co-author on our paper, actually.
Chief Medical Officer.
Yep.
The medical director for the company.
Yeah.
And Lundquist is basically Matt Budoff. It's the institute in LA that was doing your work.
Right.
The CT angiograms.
Right. So
a very well-respected academic medical center.
Absolutely. They've done lots and lots of studies. But once we get published, then I can look into it a little bit closer, which is what I wanted to do. Because even a year ago, I was saying this, I'm a little concerned about where this is different with regard to the magnitude of difference compared to other studies. That difference was a bit wider than what we see in other studies that also have semi-quantitative analysis and a quantitative analysis. So because they were a little further apart, I wanted to look into it. When I did, I found these issues, and then I brought this to the attention of the CMO. And he agreed that actually these were certainly worth them doing a quality control pass. That's what it's called, where they basically just rerun the scans. And simple enough to do, because I think the anomalies that I identified were worthy of checking back on, because they were unlike anything in any other study that's ever been done. And so sure enough, that was agreed to. He also agreed to allow me to speak publicly about it, which is why it showed up in the interview that I did that evening. And then after that point in time, not too long after that point in time, it became apparent that CLEERLY was that they changed their mind, that they're not going to run that quality control pass.
Why?
That's a question for them. I'm now in a position where we're chatting a lot behind the scenes. And I believe part of my being able to persuade them to do this quality control pass is in not being too outward about all of the concerns, but I was able to share some of those concerns in the presentation. That's what I cleared, I guess you could say, with our internal team, and that I told clearly I would be sharing. Let me give you an example. All of the values for total plaque volume under the CLEERLY analysis, and only under the CLEERLY analysis, are all positive, as in there is no regressors. There's not a single regressor in all of the CLEERLY analysis. And we haven't talked about regression yet. It's worth emphasizing that we didn't know when we started just how many of our cohort would have such low levels of plaque at baseline, in spite of them being middle-aged. Because of how low their plaque levels were, it's unsurprising that the change in their plaque levels would also be low, whether it was positive or negative. The reason I'm calling that out for it is that if there's a small amount of change and your ability to detect it is limited, there's a point at which it gets noisy, right?
So here you are with a study that created a big stir because it really threw a monkey wrench in the standards of medicine in my area of medicine, cardiovascular prevention. I don't focus quite so much on LDL for a whole bunch of reasons. Most doctors do. And what you showed said, there are people in whom LDL may not be the issue at all. But then, and so a low-carb community, which is very interested in this issue, comes out running around carrying a flag, making a big stir out of it. Then all of a sudden, a couple of things happen. So a lot of people are going to look at that and say, did that just totally wash out the original findings of the study? Given what I do for a living, I was really clear. No, we're majoring in minors here, and we're getting really upset over something that still has very little to do with the fact that these people were not forming that kind of plaque.
Yeah. I mean, I'll reemphasize what I was saying from earlier. Without question, there is a degree of increase in plaque cohort-wide. That degree of increase, now that we have all 4 analyses in, is, by any account of any studies you look at, low for 3 out of the 4 of them. For the CLEERLY analysis, it could be argued that it's not low. So a larger minority than what might be expected are rapid progressors under CLEERLY. Under the 3 other data sets, it's a very small amount of people that are rapid progressors. And that's part of what we're publishing now.
So I'm very forgiving in terms of my interpretation because, again, I'm looking at a little bit bigger context. I'm looking at people with 400 and 500 LDL, and I'm saying, come on, guys. If the standard expectation of the mechanism of cardiovascular risk were true, these people with 400 and 500 LDL levels would not be in the same ballpark.
That's true. Both things should have emerged in our data set.
I'm reminded of a book when I read when I was much, much younger, at least 30 years ago. It was called Galileo's Revenge. And it was about what happens in court. It was about what happens with facts and analyses and changes in belief systems. Galileo developed a telescope. He started looking at things, and one of the outcomes was, hey, guys, you know what? All these people using telescopes are beginning to say the Earth is not really the center of the universe, or at least the solar system. And some guys actually got their heads removed from their body for saying that. I mean, it was not a pretty picture for them. And I know in some conversations with you, I've been reminded multiple times of that very example.
With the appropriate amount of respect that I could count on from both sides, from supporters and detractors alike, to take as the context of a hypothesis. I don't know for sure if I'm right, but do I predict that if we can magically get a whole bunch of people who we could be completely confident are totally adherent to a diet and lifestyle that ensures good metabolic health, and then totally be sure that we remove other likely confounders, not even the ones we're aware of that are genetic, but even ones that we're not aware of. For example, I've chatted with you about this before. I'm concerned about overexercisers. I worry that there are a number of people who put themselves at a cardiovascular risk by not prioritizing recovery. And I think that's a little more likely in a lean mass hyperresponder cohort compared to other cohorts. So it could be that our data is going to be confounded by folks like that. It could also be there are a number of people who right now, including people watching this, think they're on a ketogenic diet, but are actually not on a ketogenic diet. In fact, they're eating a whole bunch of, junk food related to, with the label keto and so forth, and may actually be increasing their likelihood towards like insulin resistance syndrome. This might be hyperbole, but my larger point being is that to really feel super confident that you could absolutely test a hypothesis in the case of things like diet is super difficult because people are free living. Do I think we're going to find this association between high LDL and high atherosclerosis in spite of not having those other confounders? I would lean in the direction of I'm not sure that that'll be the case. I'm inclined to think anecdotally that there's just more to the story with LDL cholesterol. Now, I will say this. We'll caveat this piece of it. I do believe ApoB, lipoproteins, sorry to get technical, I do believe they are part of the causal pathway of atherosclerosis. It's just that doesn't mean as much as I think people think it does. It's not that serious actions to reduce LDL and ApoB might not have a corresponding decrease in cardiovascular disease outcome, because there's a lot to say about that for people who are in terrible shape metabolically. And there may be a lot there. The larger point that I'm coming around to, and the one that I'm pretty opinionated on, and I'm pretty sure for you are as well, is that I don't love how much focus there is on LDL and ApoB when we know much larger cardiovascular risk factors are not getting the same proportion of attention they deserve by comparison, right? I am concerned for family members of my own who are taking such huge steps to lower their LDL because they're being reassured that that makes them heart attack proof in spite of their poor metabolic health. And that concerns me greatly because I keep emphasizing to them, never mind things you hear with regard to cancer and the other stuff, specifically insulin resistance is a cardiovascular disease risk factor. Every study I've ever seen that looks deeply into it will tell you the hazard ratios they're multifold, far above LDL. And that's if you completely believe in the lipid hypothesis. So please be mindful of these larger risks that everyone says that people don't put enough attention toward. That's just my, sorry to get on the soapbox there, but it's kind of a personal frustration of mine. And part of why I like doing this research is because at a minimum, we can at least level set it a bit better.
Okay, so here's where we stand. The Keto-CTA trial has 4 total analyses on the same 200 scans. All these analyses agree LDL does not associate with plaque progression. The 3 of these analyses, the semi-quantitative or manual reads, and heart flow, and Q-angio, both AI reads, showed little to no plaque progression in the majority of lean mass hyperresponders, with many even showing plaque regression, shrinkage. The CLEERLY analysis stands alone in showing no regressors and in showing progression. Those manual results existed before publication. Afterward, CLEERLY's CMO, Chief Medical Officer, agreed to pursue a quality control path, but the company reversed this decision and is now refusing ahead of its potential efforts to go public. And the medical community stayed silent because acknowledging that would mean confronting the failure to diagnose and treat metabolic disease, what appears to be a bigger cause of plaque progression. Quick note before we finish this video. As we reviewed it, we realized that there are 2 groups that are very close to me that I need to speak to. One is the patients, and the other is CLEERLY. Obviously, you've heard some frustration in my voice about the CLEERLY analysis. So let me speak to those 2 groups. To my patients, if you've had a CLEERLY scan, don't worry. Your care plan does not change. I still use CLEERLY. I still trust CTA-based plaque analysis. And nothing in this video means that you're suddenly at higher risk. Remember, I'm a patient too, just like you. We found a mismatch in one data set, and that's all. We have time to sort it out, and we will do that. To the folks at CLEERLY, this is not an attack. You've built something very valuable, and I've sent many patients your way because of the value that you've provided. Right now, all we're asking for is the simplest step in science. Let's run a quality control pass on this data set. If your read is correct, we'll cover that publicly. If there's an issue, we'll fix it calmly, professionally, and together. The bottom line is this. 4 analyses were done on the same scans. 3 showed little to no plaque progression. But 1 out of the 4, the CLEERLY read, shows much, much more. This has a big impact, not just for the patients involved, preventive medicine and cardiovascular prevention especially. It has a big import in terms of LDL, ApoB, and metabolic disease. This doesn't mean that anyone's wrong. It just means that we owe it to those patients that were involved to look again, to the scientists that were involved, and to all the other patients, scientists, doctors, and viewers that are impacted. So let's stay calm, we'll stay fair, and just follow the data step by step wherever it goes. And if you want to understand more about the role of cholesterol and heart disease, check out this video right here.